knows the roots. He knows all of the ologies of words. And we're so pleased to have him tonight in our midst. And we want everybody, if Brother Walker will allow me to, we want everybody to stand on our feet and put our hands together for our keynote speaker for tonight, all the way from Los Angeles County, California, Dr. Ernie Smith.
Hotep. Assalamu alaikum. What's up? Let me begin, as I always do, in honor of my mama and my grandmother. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my redeemer. Just trying to show some respect for the effort my mama and grandmother made to raise me in the admonition of a supreme being. Even though I might stray away from the one that they was off into, I do recognize the existence of an all-powerful being that's in control of what's going on, and that I want to be a part of that divine plan. As I say, that particular prayer is that I'm asking the divine God to take control of my mouth, because all y'all can hear is what come out of my mouth. He knows what's in my heart. And I want the truth to be what you get. And so I want him to be able to make that truth understandable to you. I'm so glad that Brother Alton Maddox kind of spiritually gave me the direction that I should go, because I had a two-pronged thing. When Sister Karen Mason called and asked me to give a title, I was coming to announce the existence of a new book that just came out. It's edited by Professor Clinton Crawford. Dr. Crawford is at Medgar Evers College at City University, New York in Brooklyn. And I have an article in here that all of y'all need to read, because it's the bomb. And I'm going to dwell on some of the stuff, because I don't want to dwell on the stuff that I've already spoken on. And a lot of times people say, oh, I've heard that one before. Don't he know something else? Well, that stuff that's different is in this book. And I'm going to give you just a taste of it, because it does deal with the law. When I first as a graduate student, became aware of the fact that the language of descendants of enslaved Africans was an African language system, I wrote letters to what was then called the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. Somewhere in the early 1970s, they made a split between the Department of what they call HEW, H-E-W, Health, Education, and Welfare, and took the Department of Education out. And so now there's a federal Department of Education, and the Department of Health Services is just the Department of Health and Human Services. That division came subsequent to the letters that I'm going to be showing you tonight. But I want to give you that background and history on the struggle of our people, because in a previous presentation that I made to UAM, I tried to describe the fact that the descendants of enslaved Africans who are really astute in their understanding would recognize that the language that we speak represents the language of our nation. I mean, people claim to be black nationalists, and then when you ask them, what do you mean you are black nationalists, they kind of understand that the nation of people who are descendants of enslaved Africans are not really members of that nation style, the United States of America. And as Brother Maddox has pointed out, that's because the Constitution itself had nothing to do with you when it was created. We were made a part of this government, but we were not a party to its creation. We were being held as captives and enslaved, performing involuntary servitude. And that Albany Convention and that First Continental Congress and that Second Continental Congress and all that stuff that those crackers was doing to try to form this, as they call it, perfect union. And I learned something tonight, and I got to go back and correct a whole lot of my notes, because I sure enough thought that the crackers wrote the Constitution. And I'm man enough to admit that they had fooled me on that one. I hadn't done that much search in the history, boy, and it's always good to have a brother that is in the field that will guide you. You see what I'm saying? Because he studies law. And I had looked at this as a creation of the white people without taking into consideration the historical context in which it was going on. So it was a blessing to be here tonight to hear Brother Maddox break down the fact that the Native American, the Iroquois Indians, were the people who gave this cracker the concept of a federation as opposed to this separate states' rights. And I am definitely going to correct that in my own presentation. But in that presentation, I was pointing out that there's a definition of a nation that is put forth by what are called dialectical and historical materialists, that a nation is a historically evolved, stable community of people formed on the basis of a common language, a common territory, a common psychological makeup, manifested in a common culture and a common economic life. I'm going to say that again just for the record. What is a nation? A historically evolved, stable community of people formed on the basis of a common language, a common territory, and a common psychological makeup, manifested in a common culture and a common economic life. Now, one of the parts then of a nation is it has a common language. Well, how you going to be a nation and you claiming some other nation's language as the language of your nation? You automatically done fool yourself if you claiming to be a non-self-governing nation, but you claiming the nation of another language of another nation as your national tongue. So this is the one thing I was trying to get across in that presentation about Ebonics. Ebonics not only identifies the African ancestry in the structure of the way you speak, but it identifies for you a language system that sets you apart from other nations of the world. The language that is called Ebonics, as you've heard me over the years, and you know, UAM was way ahead of them people in 1996, because first time I presented was at the Slave over in Brooklyn. That was in 94. So the UAM was way ahead of them old dead Lazarus Negroes who found out about Ebonics in 1996 with the Oakland Resolution. But what y'all knew was that this thing on Ebonics had been going on all the way back in the 70s, that there were black nationalists putting forth the notion that the black man in America was not members of that nation style, the United States of America. He had his own language, and that language can be identified as genetically related to the Niger-Congo and West African languages from which we were brought from Africa speaking. In 1976, this is 3 years after the term Ebonics was coined, I wrote a letter to the then Secretary of HEW. His name was Ed Aguirre. Okay. This is when I was a professor of linguistics at Cal State Fullerton. And this is December 1976. That's ironic because it was in December 1996 that the Oakland School Board passed their resolution. I just noticed that. I say, dear sir, enclosed please find a copy of a notice motion entitled A Case for Bilingual and Bicultural Education for United States Slave Descendants of African Origin. Inasmuch as the contents of this complaint are self-explanatory, I shall not in this memo address them again. I anxiously await your response and shall at all times be available to assist, advise, and cooperate with any and all parties responsible for the remediation of the conditions upon which this action arose, in their efforts to create and construct the programs envisaged as necessary in this complaint. Until then, may peace be upon you, and I sign my name, that's Sudani, Ernie Smith. Okay. In 1978, after several students of mine had written letters wondering what the response was to my letter, one of my students got a reply, the brother from Latin America. And they replied to his letter thanking him for his concern, but his concern was relative to the concern that I had raised, and this is what they told him. Thank you for your letter of December 12 directed to the U.S. Commissioner of Education. He has asked me to reply to your letter. Upon receipt of your letter, I asked my staff to review and analyze a response to your concerns. My staff has now informed me that your letter is one of several others which have expressed concern about Ebonics and made reference to a communication addressed to Dr. Ernie Smith by the U.S. Commissioner of Education. Of course, we recognize Dr. Smith's prerogative in sharing his letter with whomever he pleases. That is his right. However, we would prefer at this time to reply to your concerns and write our comments to the general theme of your letter. It appears that the main point of discussion is whether United States slave descendants of African origin are of limited English-speaking ability and whether they qualify under the Bilingual Education Act as alleged in your letter. The Bilingual Education Act, specifically the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, that's ESA, E-S-E-A, Title 7, Section 703(1)A and B, and Section 703(2) are very clear in determining eligibility for participation in a bilingual education program. Our comments are also based on our cognizance of the decision of the United States Supreme Court in Lau versus Nichols of January 21, 1994, which relied heavily on the May 25, 1970 guidelines of HEW, that's Health, Education, and Welfare, which states in part, quote, where inability to speak and understand the English language excludes national origin minority group children from effective participation in the educational program offered by a school district, end of quote. Their emphasis is added with the underline. The district must rectify the language deficiency so that these children can participate in the instructional program. The above stated considerations equally apply to the U.S. Office of Education in determining that it is unlikely that the children identified by the claimant, Dr. Smith, adhere to the provisions contained in Public Law 93-380, ESAW Title VII, and Section 703(1)A and B, and Section 703(2), unless it can be demonstrated that these children do speak Ebonics at home and arrive at school not understanding the English language, and that these same children cannot benefit from English instruction, emphasis added. At this juncture, we must express the difficulty experienced in analyzing some details in your letter, as well as some stated allegations of Dr. Smith. Specifically, we would recommend that interested individuals substantiate the research findings of linguistic claims of Ebonics vis-a-vis the language used in the classroom. This recommendation is important because our analysis reaffirmed the stipulation that dialects or variants of English are not considered for purposes of the law to be languages other than English. It would appear that a reasonable approach would include the stance and posture of Ebonics as viewed by recognized educational organizations such as the Modern Language Association and the American Council of Teachers of Foreign Language. Let me stop there and explain what they're saying for more clarity. I had wrote a complaint telling them that there was an African language system in the home of black children, and that black children who spoke this African language system should not be treated as English language learners or English language speakers, but should be treated the same as Native American, Latino Hispanic American, Chinese American, Middle East American, Italian, and everybody else who are limited English speaking because they come from backgrounds where a language other than English is dominant. I'm going to quote the law in a minute, but the argument that I was making was that Ebonics is not a dialect of English. They construed Ebonics to just be a synonym for black English. In other words, we're talking about the same thing, but you calling it something different. Now I said, no, I'm talking about something different, an African language system that you claim is the same thing. So they're telling him that the Modern Language Association, these white crackers here, and these people who belong to the Association for the Council of Foreign Languages, have already decided what we have as a language system, and since they don't recognize Ebonics as a language system that's African, the federal government don't have to. That was the position that they had taken then. Let me go a little further. As a final point of information, the ESAW Title VII Bilingual Education Act program is intended to supplement and complement the educational activities of local school districts as required by law. Therefore, it is the domain of the local school district to determine which children of limited English-speaking ability will participate in the program with parental consent. Federal government was saying, we don't decide what language people speak. The school district got that authority. They only apply to the federal government for supplemental funds. The obligation to educate every child in a school district is the school district that the child lives in. And if the parents identify the home language as a language other than English, then it's the school district responsibility to address the needs of the child appropriately. And if that child is speaking a language other than English in the home environment, we got some money over here to supplement the general fund effort that the school district is supposed to make to educate these children who are limited and non-English proficient. We don't make that decision, but we understand that the school districts are telling us that this language that they call in Ebonics is a dialect of English, and since bilingual education is for people whose home language is a language other than English, y'all can't get none. And that was the same thing that they told the Oakland School District when the Oakland School District declared their research verified that the term Ebonics referred to an African language system. And in the Oakland Unified School District, if parents identify themselves as speakers of an African language system, they would be treated the same as all other children in the district whose parents identified them as speakers of a home language or primary language, a mother tongue, or native language. These are all synonyms for the notion that children acquire the language they speak in the environment in which it's spoken and heard. And what these children acquire at home, the parents designate on the home language survey, and if they identify an African language system, they're entitled to be treated as African descendants and given the appropriate instruction of English as a second language by people who understand their primary language and English, just as they do for everybody else whose primary language is not English. But if you put English on your home language survey, you don't get bilingual education. Matter of fact, it must be something wrong with you. You put English down and we test you, and depending on where you score on these English language tests, they put them kind of children as educable mentally retarded, trainable mentally retarded, or profoundly mentally retarded, depending on how low they score. That's what you get when you ignorant enough to claim you're a black nationalist and keep putting English on your home language survey of your children. You labeling your children pathological.
Come on, brother.
You don't hear me. But he said it's the school district that makes the determination, and they apply for supplemental funds with parental consent. These determinations are decided by the local board of education, which then instructs the district superintendent to sign the application requesting such funds from the United States Office of Education. And we cannot emphasize strongly enough that the local school district establishes the needs and selects the children to participate with parental consent. So you ain't got no squabble back here at the federal level as far as they was concerned. This is a Caucasian with a Spanish surname. And I know a lot of y'all talk that unity with our brown brothers and sisters. See, but I don't make an excuse for white supremacy just because it has a Spanish surname. All right? White supremacy is white supremacy. And a lot of y'all are obliged and feel somehow willing to excuse it if it's wearing a Spanish surname. Okay? The Spaniards was going to Africa and bringing our people to their colonies in South, Central, and Mexico, America. Just like the Frenchmen, the Dutchmen, the Portuguese, the Englishmen was doing. And a lot of these honorary white or wannabe white mestizos who gained from being light, bright, and almost white don't feel nothing about putting a foot in your rump to maintain white supremacy with that Anglo Papa Charlie and Miss Ann. And this is what I was getting from this cracker with the Spanish surname. For these reasons, the United States Office of Education recommends that you appropriately direct your concern and comments to your local Board of Education. And in this manner, make your concerns known directly to him. That was what I got from the federal government, 76 and 78. At that same time, I went to the state of California Department of Education, and at that time there was a black man by the name of Wilson Riles, who was the state superintendent of public instruction, and I wrote him the same letter that I had wrote the federal government. See, it says the same thing. Enclosed, please find a copy of notice motion entitled Case for Bilingual Education and Bilingual and Bicultural Education for United States Slave Descendants of African Origin. And as much as the contents of this memo are self-explanatory, I shall not in this memo address them again. I anxiously await your response. It was basically the same letter. And I got a letter of reply from Wilson Riles. This is what this Negro State Superintendent of Public Instruction wrote me back, 1977, in February. Thank you for your letter dated December 10, took him to February the 24th to reply, and the materials you submitted on the distinction between African Americans and others in their linguistic backgrounds. As you have documented very well, some blacks have apparently interjected African language patterns into English while others have not. Now, let me show you how Eurocentric this Negro is. We were speaking African languages, and we were now being introduced to the English language. So if you are not speaking English like the English people speak it, you're not interjecting African features into English. You're retaining African features and adopting English as you best understand it. I've already given a lecture on linguistic retentions. So you understand then that this man is operating from a premise that we already speak in English, and now we adopting some African features into our English. The argument was we are Africans and we're limited English speaking because we're Africans. And it's these African patterns that are interfering with our ability to speak English as an ideally competent English speaker speaks it. So he missed the point and goes on to say, as you have documented very well, now he acknowledged the scholarship there, some blacks have apparently interjected African language pattern into English while others have not. The point that I was making there is that when we were in captivity on the plantation, some of us had actually working in the house, some of us worked around the big house, and some of us worked out in the field. So you had two big categories, and I introduced that one around in the yard. So you had house niggas and field niggas, and what I call yard niggas. Okay? The point is, obviously, the house niggas being up around Papa Charlie and Miss Ann gonna learn to imitate Papa Charlie and Miss Ann better than them that is out there in the field who ain't got that kind of interaction. In other words, their mimicry skills will be almost the same as Papa Charlie's and Miss Ann. And you see some of them today. They learn to speak English and don't punch out. They're my color, but they're not my kind. I'm an individual. You seen them, betcha by golly wow, Negro. I'm not putting them down for learning how to speak English. They're getting paid. Brian Gummer get paid. Down with it, can't quit it, best that ever did it. But I'm talking about what was he speaking when he was first coming in the world and his mama was talking to him and his grandma and grandpa and Big Annie and Little Annie and wall-to-wall black people around. What was he talking before he learned how to imitate white people? And a lot of our people think that being able to emulate white people is somehow indicative of some level of cognitive superiority. It don't take a minor bird or a parrot much sense to imitate human speech, so I don't know what they thinking is so great about imitating a peckerwood. Y'all see me show you how they used to do in speech classes. How you told to keep your teeth together and move those lazy lips and move that thick tongue so that you can correctly speak the King's English. Real betcha by golly, wow. Okay? Somehow I'm supposed to sound like a white middle class or some white upper class Midwestern homosexual, and that's supposed to make me sound intelligent. I'm a fool if I don't sound like a white Midwestern male homosexual. And sisters think that a nigga that don't sound like a white middle class or upper class Midwestern homosexual is ignorant. Because the brother don't know white man's language, he misplaces, modifies, leaves prepositions at the ends of sentences. He don't know the Peckerwood language. He don't think like no neck. His mama ain't no neck. His dad ain't no neck. His grandma ain't nobody in his family neck. What you expect him to sound like? I'm talking about sisters actually won't give brother no rhythm if he ain't too tight to rap on the English skill. I ran up on it, so I can tell you about it. Because I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma. That's where I was born. And my people was out of Louisiana, Monroe, Grambling, Rhinegold, way down there in the bottoms. All right. Bigfoot country. Let me go a little further. He says, I believe that this offers some valuable lessons for teachers who are attempting to deal with black children who are substantially below average in language development. He says, I cannot, agree, that black children utilize a primary language other than English within the meaning of the Bilingual Education Act of 1972 or 1976. A large number of Americans, both European and non-European, have ancestry who spoke a language other than English. One would presume, therefore, that some linguistic differences would be passed down and cause difficulties in the learning of language patterns. The bilingual education funds, however, are designed for those who cannot benefit from instruction in English language, but who would benefit from instruction in academic subjects, including English, when that instruction is given in another language. Now, in my presentations before, I have shown you a document from UNESCO that did research on the teaching of literacy to children in all of the African, Asian, and Latin American countries. And the declaration that was made by the scientists in 1954 in the UNESCO report that the best medium for teaching a child is the child's mother tongue. If you're going to teach me something, you got to talk to me in a language I can understand. You start talking to me in a language I don't understand, how you go, you ain't talking to me. If I came in here and started telling y'all, ich spreche Ihre Sprache nicht gut. Was machst du? Was ist dein Muttersname? Was ist deine Frau? What am I talking to you? You ain't able to decode none of that noise unless you done went over there and studied some Kraut. That's German. Okay? Was machst du is what make you. How are you? Was ist dein Muttersname is what's your mother's name. Ich spreche Ihre Sprache nicht gut is I don't speak your speech good. I don't speak your language well. Okay? If I come in here and start telling you some Karim min Beirut fi Lebanon, who what to be fil mustashfa, and the Mohandes min Abu Dhabi, shuguli fi wazara il bato. You ain't understanding none of that unless you're a Muslim and study some serious Arabic. And then you may not understand mine because I'm speaking that Arabic with a whole lot of Ebonics superimposed. But what I said was Karim min Beirut fi Lebanon, that is Karim from Beirut in Lebanon, huwa tabib, that he doctor, fil mustashfa is in hospital. Ana Mohandes is I'm an engineer. Min Abu Dhabi is from Abu Dhabi. Shuguli fi wazara, that shuguli is my occupation. Shuguli, I'm an engineer. You see what I'm saying? Shuguli fi wazara il petrol. I work as an engineer in the Ministry of Petroleum. Let me go a little further. He said, I am referring to your referring your materials to Dr. Glenn Davis, our Associate Superintendent for Elementary Schools, so that he may explore the implications of your research in our elementary school programs. Thank you for calling this matter to my attention. Sincerely, Wilson Riles. Now, the one thing that I can say for Wilson Riles, before he left office, he did, out of some paperclip money that he had as discretionary funds, create what became in the state of California a standard English proficiency program. But he only did that after the Ann Arbor decision in 1979. In 1980 was when he gave these funds, and these funds were allocated to the state compensatory education department, and they created a statewide compensatory education program. There was another letter sent to a student by Wilson Riles, because, as I say, many of these students, as a part of their term paper, would prefer to write letters to these officials to try to get some clarification on what the problem was with the research that I had done. And so this is why he's writing back to this particular student. This is a sister by the name of Cheryl Bunnell. Says, this letter is in response to your letter of May, wherein you plead reconsideration of my response to Dr. Ernie Smith, dated February 24, 1997. Can I get some tissue? I'm sweating like a pig up here. Please know that I fully understand your concerns about the distinction between African Americans and others in their linguistic backgrounds. I believe that teachers can be much better prepared to assist black children who are substantially below average in language development. I do hope that the work of Dr. Smith and others will continue to contribute to teacher preparation in this area. Now, with the specific reference to your contention that black children are eligible for programs supported by the Bilingual Education Act of 1972 and 76. I must again conclude that black children do not utilize a primary language other than English within the meaning of the Bilingual Education Act of 1972 and 1976. Bilingual education funds are specifically designed for children who cannot benefit from instruction in the English language, but who would benefit from instruction in academic subjects, including English, when that instruction is given in another language. The issue is a legal definition of eligibility, not one of denying services to black children. Black children who are deficient in reading and language development are eligible for special instruction assistance funded by Title I. These are compensatory education programs. You're poverty-stricken and you're disadvantaged, so you get Chapter 1. And that difference goes all the way back to the Western and Niger-Congo African languages that your ancestors spoke. They ain't even interested in viewing that. In fact, the whole paradigm for making sure that you understand that your language is English is that your ancestor didn't have no language in Africa. That all your ancestors had in Africa was some pharaoh grunts, some distress signals, some mating calls. That's about the most you ever had. And the white man had to come over there and give you a language. And he had to simplify his language by talking to your ancestors in baby talk. He had to pigeonize his language. And this pidgin English, this pidgin French, this pidgin Dutch, this pidgin Spanish, this pidgin Portuguese is what your ancestors learned from old Massa. And that was your first introduction to human speech. As Carter G. Woodson said in Miseducation of the Negro, you didn't even have a thought. So how could you have a language when you ain't had a thought to represent a language in, a language to represent a thought in? She says at the end here, the issue, black children who are deficient in reading language are eligible for special instructional assistance by Title I and the state educational disadvantaged youth programs. Best wishes in your future efforts to serve the interests and needs of black children. And that was Wilson Riles' response to that student.
There was one other student, her name was Carolyn Cooper, and she got a letter from a Latino or Hispanic, Caucasian with a Spanish surname, Guillermo Lopez. This letter is in response to your recent inquiry to Dr. Wilson Riles regarding the use of bilingual education funds. You have made some interesting comments regarding the linguistic problems encountered by the black students who have descended from various language groups in Africa. I believe you will find that similar problems are faced by students who are second, third, and fourth generation descendants from other languages throughout the world. There is no doubt that teachers should be familiar with the linguistic problems faced by the students they teach. This makes the instructional process much more beneficial to the students as well as easier for the teacher. However, the point you appear to want to make is has to do with the use of both federal and state funds labeled for bilingual programs. Even a casual perusal of the rules and regulations and basic laws will point out that a bilingual program also includes instruction in the pupil's primary language. You got to have a language to get bilingual education. This is one of the requirements for programs operated with these special funds. I would like to point out that in the last 15 years, millions of dollars have been made available to districts through ESA Title I. Now, this Pancho here is talking about the money we getting in special ed. You can't get no bilingual money. Y'all getting all the Title I money. Now you want to come take our bilingual money. That's his inference here. I would like to point out that the last 15 years, millions of dollars have been made available to districts through the ESA Title I and our state SB 90 programs to help all students who are having difficulties with their schooling. The funds that have been made more recently labeled for bilingual quote-unquote programs have been restricted in their use and are primarily intended for those students who are unable to profit from instruction in English only. That's the point that I was making, that we learn better when we're being taught by our own. You know, in the southern schools, you was in the first grade, second grade, or third grade until you got it. But I ain't met nobody that went to school in the South that can't read. Now, if they went to school, they can read. All right? Now, a lot of our people didn't go to school, so you find a lot of our people that can't read. All right? I done met kids with high school diplomas that can't read out here in California and in the city of New York. Can't recognize their name in 10-inch uppercase letters with a high school diploma. All right? Point that I'm making here is that this distinction between Title I money and Title VII money is a part of a white supremacist thing to keep in law what they have always been doing relative to black people. The Bilingual Education Act, just like the Civil Rights Act, sunsets every 5 or so years and has to be reauthorized by Congress. The Bilingual Education Act of 1972, then it got reauthorized in 76, it was reauthorized in 1988, got reauthorized in 1994. I'm going to read a section from the Bilingual Education Act of 1988, just to show you what the law says as the definition and what the policy is. This is Title VII, Bilingual Education Programs. There are large and growing numbers of children of limited English proficiency. Many of such children have a cultural heritage which differs from that of English proficient persons. The federal government has a special continuing obligation to assist in providing equal education opportunities to limited English proficient children. that regardless of the method of instruction, programs which serve limited English proficient students have the equally important goals of developing academic achievement and English proficiency. That the federal government has a special and continuing obligation to assist language minority students to acquire English language proficiency that will enable them to become full and productive members of society. That the instructional use of development of a child's non-English native language promotes student self-esteem, subject matter achievement, and English language acquisition. So when somebody's talking to you in a language that you can understand, your self-esteem is not being messed with. This is what the intent of the law. And every year they reauthorize it, they state as a preface to the reauthorization what the aim of the law is, what the policy is for recognizing the rights of limited English proficient students. We find the definition now. Limited English proficiency and limited English proficient, when used with reference to an individual, means A, individuals who were not born in the United States, or, and I'm stressing or, whose native language is a language other than English. Says that two ways you can be of limited English proficient. A, you weren't born in the United States, so you had to be born somewhere where English wasn't the primary language. Or simply if your primary language or native language is a language other than English. B, individuals who come from environments where a language other than English is dominant. And when they say environments where a language other than English is dominant, they're saying that you can be born on the soil that is called the United States of America, just like Native Americans are born on territories in the geographical area that encompasses the United States of America. But to the extent that Native Americans have been born in social isolation on reservations, the language they acquire in that environment is Yaqui, Navajo, Sioux, Iroquois, Mohawk, Mohican, or whatever tribal dialect of the Native American language they were exposed to. Being born on the soil of the United States don't make your language automatically English. Is what is the language environment and what are you exposed to in that environment? The argument that I was making was that black children born into environments where black parents are making black sounds, which is what we mean by Ebonics, are in an environment where a language other than English is dominant. Notwithstanding the fact that Ebonics has adopted a lot of European words. Me stress adopted as opposed to borrowing, because when you borrow something, you're supposed to be going to do what with it? So if we've adopted, that means that it's a part of our system. So be careful when you say we borrowed their words. We adopted their language system, vocabulary-wise, but we did not adopt their thought process. We don't think like them in the deep structure. And that's manifested in the grammar in terms of the way we sound, as well as the way we arrange our words to express our thoughts. And C says, individuals who are American Indian and Alaska Native who come from environments where a language other than English is dominant has had a significant impact on their level of English language proficiency. So they specifically point out that Native Americans can be on territories where a language other than English is dominant, even though they would be in that area may be encompassed by what is called the United States of America. They go here to number 2. The term native language, when used with reference to an individual of limited English proficiency, means the language normally used by such individuals, or in the case of a child, the language normally used by the parents of the child. Your native language is the language that the people who raised you were speaking. And let me also share with you that the notion of parent don't mean necessarily your biological parent. Any human being that impacts upon a child in a nurturing way is parenting that child. So when I use the word parent, I don't mean somebody who sires a child or who just gives birth extra utero. The person who impacts on the child in a nurturing way after birth is the parent of that child. And they're saying that the parenting person influences the child's language acquisition. In most instances, we know that the children who are born in our situation are pretty much parented by at least the mama. But we have a lot of instances, especially now with the crack cocaine epidemic and sisters now being, sprung, and then some kind of recovery program and the kids being snatched from them and given to the grandparents. I mean, it's rampant in California. I don't know what it's like here in New York. But it's serious business. White people making big money. They put them babies with the grandma and grandpa, family. They don't even want to give them $300-400 a month for care. And they take that same child and put them with some necks, and all of a sudden it's $5,000 a month for all the special needs these drug-addicted babies got. You don't hear me. They take the same child and put it with some white people, and that white people get $5,000 and up a month for parenting that child. And when the grandparents, because in California they say you're supposed to go to the biological kin first to seek placement. And if there isn't a suitable placement available, then you seek outside the biological kin. That means you have to exhaust all the aunties and cousins and everything. You're supposed to. But it's big business in California. Okay? These necks getting rich off our babies. But the point I was making is the children who were being reared by black women in the black environment were being parented by people whose primary language was Ebonics. Even if they were bilingual, if the child comes to school, I don't care how much English the parent knew, that child is exhibiting limited English proficiency, and you can attribute that limited English proficiency to 2 reasons. It's either something cognitive or physiologically wrong with the child, or it's environmental. That's the language of the environment. I elect to view black children as normal until some scientific evidence by a physician demonstrates some other cause. I mean, if some children say, I thought the thing, and nobody else in the house is and I thought the thing, then that is likely something that could be caused by something anatomical. I'm not saying that all black children are born physiologically normal. We know that sometimes the very use of drugs and cigarettes and alcohol can arrest the development of organs. Children will be born with anatomical differences in their ability to speak because of an arrested development of a speech organ. So let's separate those children who are the talk cause stutter. You see what I'm saying? We know we see some black people that talk that way. that may be something related to a neurological problem. But just plain old Ebonics shouldn't be classed in that category. And that's the distinction that I'm making here. That they recognize that Native Americans born in environments can be born in an environment where English is not dominant. And they're also saying that the native language is the language of the parents of the child. The term low income, when used with respect to a family, means an annual income for such a family which does not exceed the poverty level determined pursuant to section 1005C2. That's for the Title I programs. The point that I'm making then is they had enshrined in the law a way of denying equal education to black people as African descendants. They'll pump a lot of money to you as long as you accept labels that designate you as victims of social and physical pathology, or as people who have arrested development that can be attributed to cognitive impairment and biophysical defects. But the minute you start claiming that your differences in English proficiency are related to your African ancestry, they don't want to hear it. I have the statement that was made by Carter G. Woodson that I quoted a while ago. I might as well put it up for those of you who may have not had the opportunity. This book is still in print. I'd encourage everybody to get this book. It's not hard to read, but you really need to understand he was an African historian who had the presence of consciousness to really direct my studies, because I was running around here one of those black English fools until I read this statement in this book. Okay, so I'm freely admitting how ignorant I've been in my growth and development and understanding of who I am and what my condition is. He says on page 19 in Miseducation of the Negro, in the study of language in school, pupils are made to scoff at the Negro dialect as some peculiar possession of the Negro which they should despise, rather than directed to study the background of this language as a broken down African tongue. So first you got to look at what you're trying to examine. I was looking at it as a European language as opposed to an African language, and that was what was confusing all of the studies that I was doing, because it was going to obviously lead to pathology. And I never stopped to think that, man, they told you came from Africa, so why ain't you studying the African languages to see where these patterns are coming from? So in short, to understand their own linguistic history, which is certainly more important for them than the study of French phonetics and historical Spanish grammar. To the African languages as such, no attention was given, except in the case of preparation of traders, missionaries, and public functionaries to exploit the natives. This number of persons thus trained, of course, constituted a small fraction, hardly deserving attention. From literature, the African was excluded altogether. He was not supposed to have expressed any thought worth knowing. You ain't even had a thought. Now, this book was written way back in the 1930s. But this black man here tried to wake us up. And I'm still trying to help him. Now, I'm just going to give you some brief teasers of what I'm going to be talking about Saturday, because I want y'all to be there. My Saturday thing is going all the way back to what we call the Medunetta, because a couple of good friends of mine had challenged the use of the term of Ebonics, claiming that why you go and pick a Greek word? Ebony is a Greek word, and phonetics is a Greek word, so you ain't Afrocentric if you name your language a Greek word. Well, in this book, where's the book again? Where's the book? Oh, here it is. There's a chapter on Ebonics and the Medunetta. The brother that wrote that chapter is Kimani Nehusi. He's going to be there presenting with me okay? But I'm going to share some information with you, and maybe next time I come, I can go more in depth with it, because basically what I'm going to be doing is talking about the Medu Netta, but I want to first share with you the origin of the word ebony, for the record, and the origin of the word phonetics. Bear with me here. This is from the dictionary written by Budge, Egyptian Hieroglyphic Dictionary. And one of the first things that Budge points out, he admits that the language of the people who wrote the sacred writings called the Medu Netta, or hieroglyphics as it is called in Greeks. He said the whole question of the use of separate vowels we find in Egyptian words is one of considerable difficulty, and seems to me quite clear from the statements that are made on the subject by Egyptologists that no one has yet succeeded in solving the problem. It is quite obvious that the scribes systematically wrote certain words without vowels and expected the reader to supply them. And he gives an example of the P, T, and the H as the name of a god that you can recognize just without the vowels in it. The point is that when you read the hieroglyphics or Medu Netta, the vowels were never there. In Webster's Dictionary of the English language, there's a definition given of the word ebony. Bring it over here, son. Ebony. Bring it down, son. E-B-A-N, plural, ebonies, probably from late Latin, ebonus, or ebony from Greek, ebonios, or ebinos, ebony, from what? Egypt, okay, H-B-N-J. A hard wood divided by various old wood, topograpical dialect. Now that's a big one on me. I'm gonna pass that one up. Genus. This is the name of the botanical name of a tree, okay? But they tell you that it refers to a very dark, and that it means black, okay? Ebony, resembling ebony, black, okay? And they tell you that the ultimate source of this word is what? Egypt, Kemet. So you go to Budge's Dictionary as one source. In Budge's Egyptian Hieroglyphic Dictionary, we find several pages where the root word ebony is found. Page 441, H-A-N-B-I, ebony, but you got H-B, ebony. Now, just like the hour in the word H-O-U-R, hour, you don't say hour, you say what? Hour. So the H is silent, okay? Ebony, log or tree of wood, okay? Go a little further, page 446. Eben, H-E-B-I-N, ebony, Eben, that is there. And we got on page in the I's, you can also pronounce it with an I, Eban. Eban. Ebony. Eban. Eban. Ebony. Okay? Eban. That gives me first that the word is not a Greek word, it's not a Latin word. The origin of the word ebony, referring to that black wood, is what? Kemet, or ancient Egypt. Okay, let's go a little further. Well, what about phonetics? Let's go back to Budge again. And remember, they wrote in consonants. So you want to look at this as consonants. They got it here as fent, but you got F-N-T, phenet, okay? One of the judges of the Hall of Osiris, the name of Thoth. Now this Jawati or Thoth is the god in ancient Egypt who gave man the power to speak, okay? Let me show you two other citations of Thoth. The same God that gave man the power to speak is also pronounced phonetic. 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 The name of Thoth. You see that? You go back up here. Phonetic. Form of Thoth, one of the assessors of Osiris. So we got phonetic going all the way back to the ancient Kemetic language. So when you put ebony and phonetic together and you come up with Ebonics, okay, you ain't going back to Greek for the source of the word ebony. Ebony or Ebonics, created by an African psychologist by the name of Robert Williams, means black sound. I'm just sharing that with you. As I say, we're going to get a lot further in that. Okay. There's a big controversy going on in Los Angeles because we got some brothers who have an organization called the Nigration Commission, and these are brothers who went all the way to The Hague for the non-aligned nations, claiming that they was niggers. And you got some people don't like the N-word, and the argument seems to be this: that if you live in California, and some people who live in California would be called Californians, and if you worship a god or goddess named niggers, then you could be called what the people who worship Christ are called. People who worship Christ are called what? You can be a Christian and live in California. You both Christian and California. Well, if you are living in Kemet, you may be a person who's a Kemite, a Kemetic person. But if you worship this God, you're also going to be a what? Where is it at? They had it up here a minute ago, niggers. Well, yeah, niggers. Okay? Niggers, there's another God, Negers, N-E-G-R-S. That's the male God. This is the female deity. This is supposed to be Hathor's secret magical name. I'm not going to go deep into it because I say I'm a beginner in this, and I'd rather let the people who've been down with it way more than me. But I'm just sharing with you some solid bits of empirical evidence that have been being offered to support a thesis by these brothers and sisters who are pushing that just like we was uncomfortable with the word black for years, running around here calling ourselves Negroes in a language we wasn't able to speak. Okay, and we got to be able to call ourselves black, and then we decided now that we're Africans. I'm still on the African thing now, okay, just to be able to communicate with people, but I ain't got no problem being a black nigger, okay? So, a lot of people are uncomfortable with nigger, and they're gonna be now, and it may hurt you, so I'm not giving you anything but some empirical evidence that the word did go back further than Latin, okay? That when you look at the English dictionary for the word Negro and the word nigger, it's going to tell you from the Latin. But when you go to the Latin source, it will tell you that the origin is Egyptian, just like the word ebony was. Okay? So I'm sharing that with you. There'll be more of this on this at the Medgar Evers College at 3 o'clock Saturday. So I welcome all y'all to come and give in your input and challenge any of the presentations that's made along these lines. I thank y'all again for inviting me, and I'm open for some questions tonight. I do have...
Brother said he'd like to answer some questions, and I'm sure people do have some, so you may want to just line up here, and our brother, Dr. Ernie, will answer a few questions. Come on down, don't be afraid. You thought you were speaking English all these years.
Just look at the N, G, and the R. Okay, there are other N, G, and R, your consonants. Just go by niggers. N, G, and R is nigger. I don't care what vowels you find in mix, okay? You can double up the consonants, it's still gonna be nigger. All right. N, G, and R is the trigeminal root. I'll go further into the use of these roots and making prefixes and affixes to roots as a form of creating the grammar of a language, but that was not what this presentation was supposed to be about tonight. And I mean, you know, you can get so much in, and it's overkill.
A lot of people try to equate Ebonics with slang. Can you show them, talk about it a little bit?
Okay, I will. Every human language has people who differ in terms of their own socioeconomic conditions and in terms of their age differences. So you won't find old people behaving like young children, and there will be a period in the lives of children in most societies where adolescents and teenagers will differ from the rest of the people in that particular culture. The use of the word slang is a term that is used by linguists and sociologists to refer to the unique communication style of a particular subgroup in a culture or in a society. In other words, there are people who are making their life outside the system. They may be booking horses, they may be gambling, they may be slanging drugs, whatever they're doing, they considered by the white man criminals, okay? There's a language, though, that exists among people who live in the fast life that's different from the regular Ebonics that everybody else speaks. These are native speakers of Ebonics, but they have a way of sitting around me and you and communicating with each other based on common kinds of experiences and common intersecting events in their lives that are unfamiliar to me and you. You see what I'm saying? And because those kinds of things are unfamiliar to me, it usually involves the semantic variable rather than any phonology in terms of the way they sound. It's usually they will have a meaning for a word that is unique to their culture, their subculture within the Ebonics language system. These adolescents who have the ability to communicate using what was then today called Pig Latin, it's been Pig Latin. When I was coming up, Oi Bay, Earl Gay, Ut Fay, that was the Pig Latin that we learned for boy, girl, and foot, you know what I mean? But these kids come up with another one, Rizal Fizul is a real fool, okay? They have their own way of creating a communication system in which they can communicate. That would be coming under the rubric of slang. The stylized way of communicating in Ebonics with rhyme and prose, that is a part of a generational thing. It would not even be appropriate for old 65-year-old people. I mean, unless you're making some money on the stage now. But as far as just being out behaving that way, it would look kind of bizarre. So you can always attribute certain behavior that is called slang to either the lifestyle of the person or to the age of the person. Young kids are usually mimicking older kids. When you see somebody playing the dozens, they done seen older people play it. You know what I mean? Your mama on the piano stool, up jumped the baby playing the St. Louis Blues. You know what I mean? This kind of challenge somebody verbally. There's these verbal duels that we have seen brothers do ever since we was kids. Young kids come up learning how to rap or learning how to sell wolf tickets or play the dozens, high side and hoorah and jaw jacking. All of these verbal dueling, verbal ways of expressing things. When somebody copping a plea, okay, there's two ways to cop a plea. You know, some of it, what they call, getting on one knee and begging her to come back. You know, that's copping the plea. Some dudes get down on both. You know what I mean? You see what I'm saying? You start off on one with your head down, you know what I mean? And you wind up with two, you understand me, looking up. You see, this whole thing of rapping, that's all a part of the vernacular of Ebonics, but it's usually associated with a age, a generation of thing. Every language has its own subculture, dialects, okay? And in linguistics, there's a thing called diglossia. The most prestigious behavior in a language system is the acrolect, and the least prestigious is the baselect, and anything between the most prestigious and the least prestigious is called the acrolect. Well, usually slang is considered non-prestige use of the language. It's frowned upon by the more socially affluent and acceptable members of that society. So even amongst black people, there are differences in socioeconomics and things that some blacks would consider acceptable and appropriate. Testifying as one meaning for me in the culture that I was born in, it has to do with church. Now we know that we can be subpoenaed or being called into court to do that, but that's the general meaning of the term. But when we stand up in church and give honor to God and talk about how we stayed ahead of old Lucifer this week, that kind of testimony, you understand, is a part of our culture. It's a part of the ritual of the church. So we have words that refer, that's not slang. You see what I'm saying? So we have to really study the culture and know what is appropriate and inappropriate and recognize that slang does exist, but that narrows the meaning of Ebonics to just the behavior of adolescents and people in the fast track. And that's not what Ebonics is. Sister Friend, I'm sorry it took so long to give us that answer. Go ahead.
I have a message from my spirit. I've been on my people for a long time. I've been raised around a lot of, excuse me, please don't do that, please, because I don't know what you might see. I've been around a lot of people, rednecks, Caucasians, what have you, opposite of my race. But I'm finally come to New York to find my king, and he's walking the street all day, but he's just like, he don't know what to do. I do, but like you were saying, Egypt, that's where we lie. It's a deception, you know, and it's all about you. It's all about you, sister. It's all about you, my king. It's all about you. And I may sound silly, but let me be silly for just 1 minute. I may sound crazy, but let me be crazy for Jesus. Let me be crazy for the prophet, that it will profit us right now. We are so lazy. We are so asleep and caught up in our own selves that we don't even know how to get an education. We don't even know that we must learn to learn. We don't even know how to learn. We need to get down on our knees. We need to start praying daily. We need to put on a helmet of salvation, the breastplate of righteousness, learn our goals with truth, shod our feet with the preparation of peace, and the sword, and the shield to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. And that's the only way you're going to fight that battle. And it's
Any more questions? One more.
We have been taught that the European and the caves and the hillsides, of course, started his realm. Accordingly, they had a specific language. Ugh and bug and and all. Was that an actual language, or was that just a level of communication that they actually took on?
All human language begins as a thought. Vocalizations and gestures are just a way to transmit a thought. So if you start from the premise that people are human by the capacity to think, then obviously endowed with the capacity to think, the natural endowment is the ability to develop a systematic, rule-governed, and predictable pattern in the way we transmit our thoughts. This is what human speech was. Speech existed long before the ability to write. In fact, remember the last time I was here, I was telling you about the three kinds of writing systems. That there were pictograms, there were ideograms, and then there's phonogram, or what's called alphabet writing. Let me share something with you on that, show you what I mean. Our people developed this style of writing in ancient Kemet. If you saw a picture of an eye, one meaning of it is that you're talking about the eye itself. In the English language, though, that word, E-Y-E, also is a homophone for the pronoun I. So if you're looking at this from what is called the rebus principle, I, and then I put another picture up, that's a picture of a, what's that? A bee. That's I-B. Then I put a picture of a leaf up, I believe. Okay? And you see all three of them up, I believe. So, if I put another I up, I, and I put a picture up of a, what's that? A can, and I picture up of a fly, you get
break it down.
I can fly. Okay? And if you put them all up, you can read this by knowing what the sound that is associated with the picture is. I believe I can fly. That principle is how you learn to decode the medunetta. You first know what the picture represents as a sound, and then know what words associated with that picture. Okay? So this is, I'm using English words here, but you can do the same thing with the medunetta. So the whole system of being able to write human thoughts and transmit human thoughts through vocalizations, which is where all human language begins, and then learning how to systematically transmit thoughts through the use of pictures. This is a form of the pictogram writing that we did, which later became ideograms, where they didn't need to use pictures, they could use symbols that represented ideas, and if you knew what idea was associated with that symbol, you could understand what was being said just by recognizing the symbol and the idea that that symbol was. Later, each symbol began to represent a sound of speech, and that's when you get into what is called logographic writing or phonographic writing. Logos meaning word writing. You're writing alphabets that can be put together to make words or sounds of speech. The two forms of alphabet writing would be syllabary, which is where two symbols represent a syllable, as opposed to the syllable representing only one speech sound. And I'll go into that again. This is just stuff that I had for tomorrow, and I'll go for Saturday. I keep saying tomorrow. Saturday, I'll go a lot deeper into how to translate the medunetta using the principles of rebus and other systematic linguistic methods of analyzing the ancient language of our people. Yes? I think the beat came because the beat is a part of the natural rhythm. The drum is something that we had to make up in order to transmit the beat. The beat is a part of the natural rhythm. And when we make noises with the drum, we're following these rhythms that our system is able to generate and produce from us. So I think that the beat came first. The drum is something that we make to transmit the beat.
Get a question. to trap the white man during the Ashanti War.
Okay.
Ghana. I'll take it to you. See, during the Ashanti War of Ghana, drums were used to communicate and to trap the white man the time they came to take the golden stool to Europe. It was led by, not to make a long story, but it was led by a lady named Nana Ya Asantua. And the drums, which is known as the Ubunu talking drums, which I happen to play very well, we use that to form a language code. For instance, try nutri, cut the head. Try nutri, cut the head. Trinu, 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 catch him, catch him, catch him. Omukwo Asam, they went to this side. Omukwo Abuka, they went to right side. Wherever they go, the drum talk, and they don't even know that we were communicating. Thank you.
All right. Okay, again, I thank y'all for inviting me back, and I hope to get here again before the year is over. If not, I'll see you next year. But please come Saturday to the Medgar Evers College.
Brothers and sisters, please let's give it up for our Dr. Ernie A. Smith. Yes, brothers and sisters, let's please give it up. Here is a brother who